Hey folks, it is the Fighting Nerd. My co-host Charlie Roger has a night off tonight. He is mourning the loss of my beard, which met with a tragic accident. But tonight's video is going to be about why the Federation in Star Trek may be the bad guys. I submit that if you watch and look at it from a certain perspective, the Federation has the trappings of a kind of soft military dictatorship. Now, I realize that even the old show, my beloved old show, had left wing leanings. It always did. And most of the time, but it wasn't over the top left like most television and movies are now. But it was there. So what I'm, so I started thinking about Star Trek and how the Federation is actually governed. Now, first of all, let's just look at law enforcement. There is no civilian law enforcement in the Star Trek universe as far as 50 years of Star Trek, uh, Star Trek lore. The only exception to that is in the first Abrams movie, where you see civilian law enforcement that is a robot. And in Deep Space Nine, you see civilian law enforcement in the form of Odo. But even then, he wears a uniform that's very similar to the civilian militia. And he's not Starfleet, he's not Federation, he's Bajoran. And the Federation constantly gives him crap. Now, in Kirk's day, he got the idea that it was kind of the Old West, and a lot of the times the military, Starfleet, was the only law enforcement available. Maybe. But you never hear them talk even about a civilian law enforcement arm. Starfleet seems to do it all. In the next generation, it's even more prevalent. You don't, of course, it's all supposed to be utopia and people don't actually commit crimes. But in the instances where they're dealing with piracy or things like that, or even other forms of petty crime, it's military. Now, granted, if they're on a starship, you're not going to see a whole lot of civilian interaction. But you just don't hear it. It seems like Starfleet is it. On Deep Space Nine, and forgive me if I don't know the episode title, but there was a two-part episode, where there were changelings on Earth allegedly wreaking havoc. And a corrupt admiral actually tried to stage a military coup based on the terrorist threat from these changelings. Now, the interesting thing about that is when they put a state of emergency in place, the Federation and the president of the Federation, you still did not see any civilian law enforcement or even civilian security in the streets. You saw Starfleet security officers. Now, Earth is supposed to be a utopia, and you're not supposed to need police. But you know what? There's always going to be the kid that spray paints something on the wall or breaks a window, or some guy that decides he is going to step on the grass, even though there's a keep off the grass sign. At the very least, you're going to have police to deal with minor infractions and even safety regulations. I don't care what kind of utopian society you get. You're going to need cops. Unless your military is the cops. Right? And then let's look at the Federation. You hear about the President of the Federation and you hear about the Federation Council, but at no time, at any time in the series, have you heard anything about elections? Nobody's talking about who they're going to vote for the president of the Federation, or who the representative of their council is going to be. It's just president. So how exactly is the president of the Federation elected? Is it do they take representatives from each planet as delegates to some sort of electoral convention? Is there an electoral college? It's never really defined. But you would think that people being involved, especially in a quasi-military organization like Starfleet, would be talking about how their leaders are selected. Because chances are there would be some ex-Starfleet people being elected to office, but you don't hear about that. And then there is the plot line involving the Maquis in Deep Space Nine, Next Gen, and Voyager. Now, the Maquis, of course, were some people who were being forced off of the planets, largely that their families had spent generations terraforming to appease, and yes, it was appeasement, the Cardassians, in order to form a kind of a peace treaty. But when these people who had spent generations terraforming planets and making a home with their own two hands and the sweat off their brow objected to leaving their homes, Starfleet and the Federation had an apoplexy and actually turned Starfleet's phasers on their own citizens for defending, because their citizens dared to defend their homes. Now, let's put this in perspective. In the Unification episode, the famous one where Spock returns as Spock in the Next Generation, where Leonard Nimoy returns as Spock, right? A Romulan military invasion force is within striking distance of Vulcan, one of the 5 founding members of the Federation. And deep, deep in Federation territory. And the heroes, Spock and Picard and Data, expose the Romulan threat, and the Romulans turn around and leave, and nothing else happens. They don't pursue and destroy that armada. They don't even try to board it. Now, flash forward a few seasons later, where Ro is undercover in the Maquis and trying to lead the large part of their leadership into a trap, or so Picard can capture them or capture or destroy them. Picard is on a rampage. He's on the prod, right? I mean, he is almost sitting there with his the finger on the phaser firing button, waiting for a chance to fire. Now, an outside invasion of the Federation doesn't seem to bother him as much as political dissidents. If you go into the novels, Spock's world, the Federation even hinted at, I should go back. If you haven't read Spock's World, it's kind of a dual novel, 2 stories in one novel. Part of it is about the formation of Vulcan society and evolution of the Vulcans. Another part of it takes place in the modern day, where the Vulcans are having a referendum about leaving the Federation. And this is kind of cool because it was like 20 years before Brexit. And the Federation comes very, very close to threatening military action if Vulcan decides to leave. It doesn't really say that in the book, but it comes close, right? And if you go into some of the non-canon sources, in the Ben Finney episode where he's being court-martialed, I don't recall the name of that episode, where Kirk is being court-martialed for allegedly murdering a crewman and he was framed and all this other stuff. But they talk about the Vulcanian expedition in that episode. Some non-canon sources suggest that was actually the Vulcans trying to secede early in the Federation history, and the Federation actually sending military force. That's non-canon, and my memory of that is very vague. But it is interesting that the reaction to political dissidents was military force. Now, yes, some parts of the Maquis had attacked terrorists, had launched terrorist attacks on Cardassian ships and colonies. But given that they were being driven off of their home world, one could also call them freedom fighters. Myself, if I went to a planet that had no atmosphere and it was nothing but a ball of dust, and I got there when I was a kid, and I watched my parents and their friends build that world into a Class M world, and then all of a sudden somebody says, "Hey, we signed a treaty. Get off. We're giving it to somebody else." I would almost certainly take up arms. Right? Was all for the Maquis. I knew they wouldn't, but I was always rooting for the Maquis to win. But the response to the Maquis is what really starts me thinking about the Federation being the bad guys. Because these are people that have a legitimate need. You never hear about those people ever being given any kind of representation in the treaty hearings where they lost their homes. You never hear about their representative council speaking out for them. It was get out. Now, this might be just laziness on the part of the writers or something left out for brevity. But if you take this logically, these people had no representation about a allegedly democratic process that directly impacted their lives. Now think about that. And then the Picards of the universe get all indignant. Right? Oh, they're in the way of peace. No, they're fighting for their homes. Now, they're a little bit kinder to them at first in Deep Space Nine. But then you had the whole Sisko Eddington plotline. Sisko's nemesis, Eddington, who was a Maquis member. And Sisko, who was supposed to be he's a Starfleet captain. He might have been a commander. I can't remember if he had been promoted by that time, but I'm pretty sure he had been. Anyway, Sisko is willing to wreck the ecosphere of an entire planet to get this one Maquis member. And this is supposed to be the Tolerant Federation, Order 1, and all of that. Right. Yeah, mercy to the Klingons. Mercy to the Romulans. Mercy to the friggin' Borg. But somebody points at the Federation and says, "You're not perfect. You're wrong about something." And the military hammer falls. Right? The entire premise of Voyager was that their mission was to hunt down the Maquis. And things went awry, and they had to work with the Maquis. Right? Now, think about that. Right? So they're forced to work with the Maquis. And there was only one episode in there where they really went from the Maquis. They even paid any kind of attention to the Maquis' point of view. And I'm really weak on the names of Voyager episodes, but there was an episode where Janeway decided that she was going to take some of the Maquis members and give them, a mini version of Starfleet Academy training, because everybody has to be assimilated into the Federation. This is another point that I'm going to make in a moment. The Federation wants to assimilate people; they're just not as honest about it as the Borg. Right? But this guy actually tells about how the Cardassians killed his wife and kids and all this other stuff and then okay, zap, right? We're just going to hand that over to the Cardassians. But for the most part, you're just supposed to kind of forget their Maquis. And there was a Suitor character, which was really cool. He was kind of a reformed serial killer. But he was Maquis. He was a serial killer. The serial killer came from the Maquis. It couldn't have possibly have come from the Federation. And the Federation does not handle alternative points of view very well at all. And you also, and this, I guess this is kind of Rodberg's thing, because he thinks everybody should get along like the Smurfs or the Care Bears. But you never heard about political differences between members of the crew of the Federation, except for the differences about the Maquis Treaty, about the Cardassian Peace Treaty. You never heard about this policy or that policy being debated amongst the crew or anywhere else. Was because the Federation's groupthink. It makes pretty clear by the reaction of the Maquis that if you disagree with some Federation law or policy, you better keep your mouth shut. So maybe the Federation were the bad guys. And there are other things that you can kind of go into this. First, the Arena episode of the original series with the Cestus 3. The Federation just plops a colony down. And they talked about phaser batteries, so it was an armed colony in a region of space they didn't know anything about. Now, granted, you have to tell stories, and sometimes you have to get logic aside things, despite Mr. Spock. But was it just lack of due diligence in just listening for intelligence signals from what the Gorn was obviously a fairly sophisticated and large spacefaring society? Did they not pick up any signals? Or did they just put the colony there anyway? And expect the Gorn to live with it? Or whoever was there, just to live with it? And then we get to Discovery and the Klingons. Now, I've already gone on about the change in the Klingons. Stupid, idiotic, unnecessary. That's that. But look at the Klingons. Now, the producers of the show have said this is a political statement. We want the Klingons to look like Donald Trump and his supporters. I did not vote for Donald Trump. I voted for a third-party candidate, Darrell Castle of the Constitution Party. But I support most of Donald Trump's positions, full disclosure. But let's look at the Starfleet reaction to the Klingons. Now, the Klingons have remain Klingon. The show hasn't really explained why they have that idea, or why they have that slogan yet. But the thing is this. They talk about how the Federation is encroaching on our borders. And they're worried about, and I'm pretty sure they use the word assimilated. They're worried about being assimilated into the Federation, because that's what the Federation does. And it's a little bit like the federal government today, or a lot of federal governments today. Well, we're going to give you money, and we'll give you technology, and we'll protect you, and everything like that. And you just get dependent on everything they do for you. Until pretty soon, well, you're going to do it this way, or we're going to take this privilege away from you. We're going to do it this way, or maybe you're not going to get that technology we promised. And if that's what the Klingons are afraid of, it's a genuine fear, because that's how the Federation operates every time. They don't assimilate by injecting nanoprobes into you and turning you into a Borg. They make you dependent on their technology and whatever privileges Federation membership offers. And if you're not a Federation member, but you're in their sphere of influence, you can be in real trouble, because you're not going to outcompete the great, huge Federation. Right? And if you don't, and when it comes to trade, they're not going to trade with you unless you do this for it, do things their way. So you're kind of a Federation member whether you want to be or not. And I get the feeling this is what the Klingons are worried about. Now, yes, they're kind of, they've got a leader, Matuva, or whatever his name is, that is using the Federation as kind of a pretext for uniting the warring 24 houses of the Klingons. But it's a pretext that's based on a genuine threat. And they make it, and the show makes it out bad that it's bad that the Klingons want to defend their borders. It's bad that the Klingons want to maintain their own cultural integrity. And looking at it that way, the Federation is the bad guy, because you know that the Federation is not going to allow the Klingons to go on as they have been. Even in the next generation, they mentioned that the Klingons were defeated by the Federation. And you don't have the Klingon Imperial Fleet anymore. You have the Klingon Defense Force. Well, you've got to wonder what other concessions that the Klingons were forced into making. And then the Federation is all surprised and indignant when the Federation, and when the Klingons rebuild their fleet and want to fight again. So it's just food for thought. Just how lily white is the Federation? Because, as I said, you really don't see any evidence of a civilian security or law enforcement. You've seen very little or no indication that there's an actual political process. As I said, is the president of the Federation appointed by other politicians? Because you never hear about anybody voting. And the Federation's reaction to dissent of any kind is monumental. And that brings me to my last point. Ship's counselors. When I first saw Ship's counselor on Diana Troy, Ship's counselor on the first episode of Next Gen, when I encountered at Farpoint, my first thought was political officer. Like they were on a naval ship from the old Soviet Union. She has to make sure everybody's thinking right. Because you ask yourself if it's mental health, or is she there to stop wrong thinking? And there was an exchange with I believe this was the first time you ever met the Cardassians. And Worf is, he's kind of on a warpath, so to speak, because there's a Cardassian ship approaching. And Troy says something to the effect, we're not at war with the Cardassians anymore, they're our allies now. And you trust him, and Worf says something like, trust is earned. And the thing of it is this, she chastises Worf for doing his job. Right? This was a race that they had reasonable hostilities with that was approaching. And he took reasonable defensive measures. He wasn't going to open fire on them. Just wanted to be ready if they threw a punch. And she's on him. She's all sweet about it, but she's on him. Wrong thinking. Because the fact of the matter is, just because they're not his allies. They're not allies. Just because they're not currently at war doesn't make them allies. It means you're just not currently fighting at the time. But she has to get that right thinking into his head. Now, noticeably, until the last season, there was no counselor on Deep Space Nine, and my thought is because the Bajorans on there would put up with that shit. Pardon my French. And I'll tell you the truth, I don't think Sisko would have reacted well to a ship's counselor. Now, when Terry Farrell quit in the last season, they had to plug a new actress in there. Had to find something to do with her. I understand. That's really why I think Desiree was there. But there is just a lot of evidence that what you have in the Federation is a well-disguised dictatorship. And that episode in Deep Space Nine where the Admiral was trying to take over, it wasn't so much that he was trying to establish a dictatorship. There's evidence to suggest that he was there to replace that dictatorship with a military junta. Keep going on, and I think I saw another video a few years ago that went along these lines, and of course it went on with the Federation being socialist, and how that pretty much never works. I don't care what kind of technology you have, but you really do have to think about how the Federation is governed and how they deal with other races. Look at the Bajorans. Look at how they deal with the Bajorans. They want the Bajorans to become part of the Federation, right? But right away, got to do it this way, got to do it this way, got to do it this way. And rightly so. The first few seasons of Deep Space Nine I kind of liked because the characters like Kira and on the other series, Ro on Next Generation, resented this idea that in order to get Federation help, you had to adopt Federation philosophy. And then when the chips were down, the Federation was really reluctant to do anything for Bajor. Now, you would think that Bajor's recovery from the war would be something that the Federation would want to help with. After 40 years of occupation by Cardassian, or was it 60? But anyway, decades of Cardassian occupation. Their economy was decimated, their natural resources had been wiped out. The Federation offers a little bit of help in the form of Ben Sisko and company. But there was no real financial help. No real aid was going to come until they were Federation members. And Federation membership means adhering to Federation law. It means being assimilated into the Federation. One planet, Bajor, that had been stripped of its natural resources, its population had been decimated, trying to rebuild its civilization. With the resources of the Federation, the vast resources of the Federation, it could have been done in a few years. You just think about the economics of it. If the Federation system is so fantastic, and it's so big, and so politically and economically stable, and it has replicators for crying out loud, why were the Bajorans still basically in poverty at the end of the Deep Space Nine series? Why did Bajor have to join the Federation before receiving any true assistance from the Federation? Why? Because the Federation did not want a strong, independent Bajor. They wanted a strong puppet state Bajor. I think I have rambled on enough. Almost half an hour long. So I am going to leave you with my traditional salute, or admonition, depending on how you want to look at it. Remember, words make history. Jolly Roger will return in the next video, at least the next video that I actually film myself in. And my beard will recover from its tragic accident. This is the Fighting Nerd, and I hope I gave you something to think about, and probably send me some hate mail for. Good night.